All right. Well, welcome back to another episode of Persuasion by the Pint. I'm Jonathan Taylor, along with
Sean McCool. And today, Jonathan, we've got a guest in the green room
just
that we're going to be
waiting.
bringing on, just waiting. She's excitedly waiting. She's got a beverage with her, so we'll be bringing her on pretty quick. Well, you found this one. You're reading a book, and I got the book. How do we have different colors?
I got
It's
the
amazing.
hardcover.
You
I
got
got the hardcover. You got the soft cover.
Yeah, I went the cheap route, I guess.
So I'm actually just holding up the cover because I
hope the royalties are the same, Vanessa, either way. But
yeah. So we have Vanessa, and I'm going to assume I'm pronouncing this correct. Bohns. Is that right? Bohns?
Bohns.
She'll correct me.
She will.
It's an excellent book. I went through this, Sean, I think I told you about this a couple of weeks ago. This book is incredible from a standpoint, and you do a lot of coaching. So that's why I wanted to recommend this for you. It's gotten rave reviews from everyone from Daniel Pink to Robert Cialdini to, just everybody. I mean, it's got great reviews, and I can see why, because, I thought a lot about this going into some meetings this week, and just thinking in terms of understanding the influence that we have. And sometimes we get in our own head, so to speak, where we think we kind of know everything. We're so accustomed to what we know that we devalue it at times. And that's how psychology works. Everybody does it, but we'll get into that. And with that said, I guess we need to, I need to pull up her bio. Unless you want to, do you have it in front of you?
I do. I'm not going to read all of it, but I've got it pulled up here.
Okay.
Vanessa is a social psychologist and a professor of organizational behavior at Cornell University. She holds a PhD in psychology from Columbia University and an AB, don't even know what that is, from Brown University. Her research has been published in top academic journals in psychology, management, law, featured in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, The Economist, and on NPR's Hidden Brain, among other media outlets. We have certainly outpunted our coverage here on the show today, Jonathan. So, let's bring on Vanessa. I'm not going to mess up her last name.
Welcome to the show. I'm pretty sure I got it right in the first one.
Hi there.
So is that right, Bo? Is it B? So correct me. Bohns?
It's Bohns.
Bohns. Okay.
But probably it's German. So probably if we were in Germany, they would say Bohns. So I don't really care. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it was a 50-50.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's fine.
Is the H silent or not? I don't know.
Welcome to the show. So welcome to the show. I'm excited to talk about your book. We've got a lot of things. Sean showed up his stack of notes earlier, or his note card. But before we jump in, we have to do a really quick run through what we call our juvenile beer segment of the show, and where we kind of highlight what we're drinking. I know you've got a beverage on the show today, and thank you for bringing that. And I will mention you've got a gluten-free beverage, which is okay with us. As long as it's got a little alcohol, that's fine. So, so what are you having today?
So I'm very excited for my gluten-free beer, which is actually a really good tasting, like regular beer tasting gluten-free beer, Kickstep. It's by Ghostfish Brewing Company. And it's in honor of my husband who drank beer his whole life, like beer and bread. And found out he had celiac disease a couple years ago, and so had to switch. And so we spent a long couple years finding beers that weren't terrible, and this one is great.
Yeah,
very cool.
I love it. Well, kudos to you for actually working around. That's kind of what you have to do. You have to work around the when they change preferences. Sometimes you have to change preferences, right? So that's part of it.
Yep.
What are you having, Sean?
I am having I think it's like 104 today with the feels like. So we're into summer now here in Texas. So I went with a Superstation cider from Superstition Cider House. And this is a cherry ginger lime hard cider. So I put it in a
Okay.
mason jar because it just seemed like it needed that. With a couple ice cubes. So yeah, it's a hard cider. I don't know, it comes in about 6%, I think, 5.5%. So
Okay.
Now that might be gluten-free because it's a cider.
That's right.
yeah,
That's
Yeah.
right.
and they actually their parent company is Superstition Mead House or Meadery. So they do a lot of meads, which is based on honey, so they don't have all that stuff in it. So I may have to order a few meads as well.
Yeah, those
Jonathan?
ciders work pretty well when you're. Most of those are pretty. I used to drink those hard cider with the Angry Orchard ciders
yeah.
when we were going through our gluten-free phase.
Yep.
Those aren't too bad. So
Yeah. What are you having?
I have from Edmunds Oast Brewing. This is a Spider Queen.
Ooh,
look at that art.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, this is it's a deep, sweltering jungle hidden by ages of vines and undergrowth lies the ruined temple. At its heart sits the immortal. So this is good copy. At its heart, she sits the immortal, unmoved by time. That is until the unfortunate explorer's light illuminates a chamber better left to the cobwebs. So it's kind of scary. It's 6% ABV. But I'm excited. I don't know. This is kind of one of those local brewing companies, so you never know what to expect. So
you can kind of tell with the silver can with the label slapped on it. It's just
yeah. You can feel the paper label that's
been this one I can feel it too.
Yeah, it's always a giveaway. So all right, well, let's cheers it up.
Cheers.
I didn't pour it into a glass. I feel like this is not acceptable.
Yeah, we're fancy here in the South.
Sometimes I forget my glass, Vanessa, so don't feel bad. I sometimes drink out of a can too.
I was debating on the cider. Yeah, I was debating cider. Does it need a glass? And the mason jar spoke to me, so that's what we did. All right, so Vanessa, at this point in the show, we give it a rating. You already kind of tipped your hand that you like this one, but 1 to 5 pints. Use decimal points if you want. Where are you at on that for your?
So, I mean, this is probably my top gluten-free beer. It's still probably 4 out of 5. I'll be honest. It's not like I'm not going to go with a 5. But it's good. It's very good.
Cool.
Yeah. We're not generous. We don't give the 5s generously around here. So.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah, with 355 episodes, you have to kind of can't give them all straight A's, right?
How about you?
Yeah,
what's that cider rate?
It's actually pretty good. It's sweet, almost like does it say cranberry or it says cherry, ginger, lime? But together it almost tastes like cranberry. I'll give it 3.5. It's not bad.
3.5. Okay.
Yeah.
For this one, I'm going to give. I'll give a 3.9. It's okay.
Okay. Not too bad.
Not my favorite. So
not huge winners on the show today, but drinkable. We'll keep drinking.
Very precise numbers, though. 3.9.
That's right. We're very accurate on here, down to the decimal.
Very scientific.
That's right. And everything on here is very scientific. So that's why
it's kind of like you remember the show Whose Line Is It Anyway?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the points don't matter. That's the same thing. All right.
So Vanessa, give us a little background on yourself. We gave you an intro, if you would. What led you to, first of all, write the book, the research that went into it, and then we'll kind of dig into some specifics.
Yeah, so I have an AB in psychology, which is just a BA flipped. I don't know why my school does that. And so I was a psychologist, from my undergraduate years. I went to grad school as a psychologist. And one of the stories I tell in the book is kind of how I got interested in this area. And it all started in my first year of graduate school when I was working with a professor at Columbia, where I was getting my PhD. And we were kind of studying traditional influence topics, like how many people will agree to do something if you ask for it this way versus this other way. Like, are there little phrases you can use to get compliance? And I don't even remember the exact details, but to run whatever study we were running, I had to go down to Penn Station in New York City every day and get on the subway up at Columbia, take it down to Penn Station, walk into like the bustling, hectic chaos that is Penn Station, and go up to people and ask them to fill out my little survey for the study.
Yeah.
And so I did this day after day, and I would go up to people and be like, hey, will you fill out my survey? Excuse me, will you fill out this questionnaire? And it was incredibly painful and traumatic, and I just hated it. And I still, like, I have this conditioned response to Penn Station now, where I just walk in and I feel anxiety. But I did this for a week or however long it took. And then I took all the data back up to Columbia. The professor I was working with, Frank Flynn, and we analyzed it. And when we looked at the data, we found that whatever is we were testing, whatever our hypothesis was at the time, it just didn't work. And so, this happens all the time in science. It's a very normal experience. Most of the time stuff doesn't work. But in this case, it was so painful because collecting the data was so painful.
Sure.
And so I was kind of like, I can't believe it after all that I went through. And so I was kind of describing how awful this experience had been and how upset I was that the study didn't work. And Frank, as I'm describing my experience collecting the data, Frank is looking at the data I collected. So it was this fascinating moment where I'm describing my subjective experience, my internal experience of what was happening, and he is looking at the objective data. And so the data included how many people said yes to me, anything they said in response, and so he kind of put together this disconnect and was like, you are describing this horrible experience that's like awful, like almost like full of rejection. And I'm looking at the data and seeing that most people were saying yes to you. And you didn't write anything mean that people were saying back to you.
Right.
And so we had this kind of aha moment where it just felt like, wow, that might be more interesting than whatever it is we were going to study to begin with. This disconnect between how we experience our influence in our heads and sort of what is going on in reality, what's going on in other people's heads, and sort of the objective reality of the influence that we actually have on people.
Sure.
Yeah.
So why is that? I mean, why do we go into situations like that thinking that it's almost like we're in a lose-lose situation where, we've already lost in some sense, so many, like we're going into a meeting, so to speak, and we're thinking of all the things that could possibly be said wrong, or all the things that could possibly come up that we're not sure about. And, we're automatically go into that kind of at a disadvantage in our minds, but not really, right?
Yeah. I mean, so there's a few reasons for it. So one is something called negativity bias, where the times where something went poorly, for example, if we were rejected or we really just couldn't convince someone to do something or someone reacted negatively, those times loom larger, right? Those are just much more intense. Negative emotions are more intense, so we remember them more, we experience them more vividly. And so we have this stronger, longer memory for the times that we were rejected. And so that can kind of overshadow our predictions for the future. And we're like, oh yeah, rejection looms large when I'm predicting the future.
Yeah.
Another reason is that we just don't have access to what's going on in other people's heads. And so we're guessing all the time. And so, when we say something, the only feedback we get is what someone looks like in that moment or says to us in that moment, right? We have this very sort of these sparse kind of cues to figure out, like, how did that person feel about what I just said? And then we have this tendency to kind of impose on these negative worries, these anxieties, right? And so we could say something and that person walks away and they could be thinking about it days, weeks, months later. We've all had things that someone says and it's like they pop into our heads later, or we keep coming back to that thing they said. That person has no idea because we're not telling them that necessarily. They're not seeing us all the time, right? Another example is when I teach, I look out at the room and it's like blank faces. There's like one person nodding, which is lovely, but like, and this is true in lots of meetings too. It's like blank faces, bored faces, like sometimes like angry faces, just resting faces. And then I'll get these emails at the end of a lecture, or people coming up to me at the end of a lecture like, that was really great, or that was so inspirational, or now I'm remembering. And so it's just, you just can't tell from the outside cues. And when we try to guess from those cues, we're just often wrong, right? We in some ways adaptively expect the worst, because then we kind of can, try our best to avoid that. But we do expect the worst, and usually people are responding more positively and just more than we
Sure.
realize.
Yeah, one of my favorite stories about kind of this negative expectation or negativity bias is David Letterman when he was retiring from the Tonight Late Show. Been there like 26 years. And he was interviewed with Jane Pauley, and he told her, he's like, every time the phone rings on my desk, I think they're calling to fire me. Every single time.
That's great.
And, retired with a big bang, and, been hard to replace since. So it's crazy how we do that. I do the same thing. I'll see an email from clients and I get tense because I'm like, oh my God, they're going to whatever, complain. Right. Yeah. It's funny how we do that.
I studied abroad in undergrad, just a similar story. And when I went to the registrar to sort of unenroll to enroll in this other school, they were like, oh, I can't find you. And I was like, I knew it. I was never admitted. This is all just a fantasy. I don't actually go here.
Yep. So you talk a lot in the book about, there's kind of two sides to this, right? There's kind of what we expect to happen, and then the other side is like why people respond to our requests.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you can put my favorite example in the whole book was actually the gym entrance request. Like that just that was like, really? Like people would do that? Can you go through that one real quick and you can set it up and then talk about it a little bit?
The one where they had to walk people like across campus to get to the gym, right?
3 blocks or something.
Yeah. So this was basically a series of follow-up studies to that kind of aha moment that Frank and I had, right? That I realized that, I expected people to respond really negatively and say no. And in the end, I was surprised when I actually looked at the data. It was like, oh, wow, people really are saying yes and like being very pleasant. And so the first thing we had to ask as scientists was, is this just about my experience, right? Am I unusually, pessimistic, or is there something about my influence that's like unique? And so we wanted to see if other people would have a similar sort of experience. And so we brought participants into the lab and we told them to go out and ask people for things. And so it started basically having them recreate exactly what I did in Penn Station. And so we brought participants into the lab. We said, you're going to go out and ask strangers to fill out a questionnaire, just like I had done. Before you do that, how many people do you think will agree? And we said, we gave them 5 questionnaires. You're going to get all 5 filled out. How many people do you think you'll have to ask to get 5 people to agree? That's the exact question we asked. And then we sent them out and had them actually do it so we could compare what they thought would happen to what actually happened. And so what we found in the questionnaire study, which was the very first one, was they thought they would have to ask about 20 people on average before 5 people would agree, which is a lot of rejection. But in fact, they actually only had to ask about 10 people. So every other person they asked was agreeing. Wow. And then, we were wondering like how far, and this has been basically my career for the past 15 years, is like, how far can I push this? Like how many things can we get people to do that would surprise us? And so as we sort of tried different tasks, there were things like, borrow a cell phone, ask for donations to charity. We came up with the gym task, which was basically, can you get someone to walk you what was essentially like 2 or 3 city blocks to the gym? And so this was on the Columbia campus, where the gym is kind of underground and hard to find. And so we brought them down to the south side of campus, and we had our participants go up to strangers and just say, I've been trying to find the gym on campus and I can't. Can you just walk me to it? And so if someone said yes, they would have to, again, walk them like a significant amount of, for a significant amount of time to find the gym. And so in this case, they only had to get one person to do it because it was a pretty big request. And our participants thought they would have to ask, I think it was, now I'm not remembering the exact numbers, but it was something like 6 or 7 people before one person would agree. I don't know if you have that in your little index card.
Yeah.
I should know it by heart, but they actually had to ask only like 2 or 3 people. It was
Right.
very similar. Like every other person they asked was pretty much agreeing to do this pretty significant request. And
I mean,
so
that's a
yeah.
20-minute request, basically. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, if you're not, because you're in a different area, so it's like maybe a 5-minute walk
okay.
or maybe a little more, but then you're like presumably you're going back to where you were, so it's
Right.
pretty significant. And you have to like chat with the person, you know, it's not, it's like
There's
an
a lot
awkward
going on.
too. Yeah.
That really surprised me. And then you've kind of, like you said, you keep pushing this. You started kind of playing with money and those kind of questions. Like, well, yeah, you can talk about some of that.
Yeah. So we teamed up with an organization because part of us, we were wondering like how much is this about making people do something that they wouldn't have done otherwise, and they're just like, oh, you know, it's not going to work because I wasn't going to do this. And so we teamed up with an organization, Team in Training, which is part of the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, and they do these charity races where you basically ask people to sponsor you to run like a marathon or a triathlon or something. And so we teamed up with them. We had 100 people who were already planning on doing this, and they had already signed up. So they knew that they were going to have to ask people for donations to sponsor them for this race. And they made a guess of how many people they would have to ask to reach their fundraising goal. And it was in the thousands of dollars for everybody, because they were supposed to raise enough money to cover like travel and coaching and things like that, as well as a donation to the organization. And so when we asked them, how many people do you think you'll have to ask to reach your goal? They thought they would have to ask about 200 people, but then they actually kept track, and they even had this very meticulous sort of journal that they kept track in. They only had to ask closer to around 100 people to reach their goals. And so again, it's been a pretty consistent pattern that people overestimate by about twice as much how many people they will have to ask to reach a goal, to get enough people to say yes.
That's fascinating because it just shows like, so we're literally imagining the task to be twice as hard as it is, which I see that in my life all the time. Like I see that with like time-oriented tasks. I'm like, oh, this is going to take me like 3 hours, and it takes an hour and a half, like, or 10 minutes sometimes if I put it off long enough.
Yeah.
So the other thing I thought was really interesting was this whole embarrassment. Like people would rather die than be embarrassed, literally die than be embarrassed.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so that is a very dramatic way of kind of explaining the study where smoke is coming in to the room.
Well, that and the choking at the table. Like
that's
not really a study,
true,
but that was
true.
just like,
yeah, that's true.
Rather...
I forgot that's another example I use. Right. So one thing that people find and sort of PSAs on choking are designed to get you to recognize this, is that what happens is you start choking, and if you're at a table with a bunch of people, you start just feeling really awkward and embarrassed that you're choking. And so people's initial instinct in that moment is to go away from the very people who could save their lives if they are actually choking, right?
Just choke by themselves to death, right?
Yeah. So
but the reasoning...
Or apologize. I'm sorry for disturbing you that I'm choked while I'm choking to death.
Exactly. It's like this politeness thing. It's this embarrassment thing. I'd rather just go into the bathroom by myself and deal with this. But that's where people end up dying, as you said, because no one was there to help them.
Yeah.
So yeah, literally, like the fear of embarrassing or being rude or whatever is greater than the chance that they might die. Now, I don't know. I think you'd be in such a panic state. Maybe you're not thinking that you're actually going to die. I don't know, but
probably.
Or here's another example. You're sitting, because if you fly very often, if you have to go to the restroom during a flight, right? And you're sitting on the window seat.
Yes.
Like, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? Is that I think I'm just gonna wait and see if I can hold it through the flight. Just
maybe
to
they'll get
scare
up
myself.
first. Yeah, maybe they'll get up first, and I can go right after as they're coming back. Yeah.
Totally. Or there's that quote by Jerry Seinfeld about like people would rather be in the coffin than giving the eulogy at a
Yes.
funeral
Oh, yeah.
because people's worst fears like go like being public speaking and then death.
Right.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, but you really tested this theory. You were going to mention this, the smoke in the room. Were you actually, or not? Was it you, or was it just another
This
study
is
that
like
really said that?
an old study. It wasn't mine. Yeah.
That was pretty fascinating too.
Yeah, that's a classic study of diffusion of responsibility, where basically if you're sitting in a room and smoke starts filling the room and you look around and no one else is reacting, you're too embarrassed to want to get up and make a big thing of it and like sort of panic and tell the experimenter in this case that something's going on, because if everyone else is like chill, I don't want to be the one who's unchill, right? And so people will just sit there and let smoke
That is
fill
so.
the room.
As I was reading, I was like, "There's no way I would. There's no way I would do that." But then right after that, you kind of answered that objection in the book. You're like, most people think they wouldn't do that; that they would be the ones that spoke up, but most people aren't. Like that was. I was like, "Crap!" She's read my mind.
It's so true. Yeah, we think we're going to be, the brave, emboldened person
And rational.
the rational person. Yeah, and in the moment, we just freeze. We're not, and it happens. So some of the other sort of classic demonstrations of it are, speaking up. If you hear someone saying something like sexist or racist, everyone's like, of course I would say something in that moment. But then most people don't, because it's awkward. And you're like, in your head, it's easier to explain it away in some way and not have to say something that could offend people or might embarrass you or them than to just like, to actually say something.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's survival, right? You don't want to be kicked out of the tribe. You want to be in the tribe, even though it's not your tribe.
Yeah.
A lot of these times, but it's the human tribe, and you don't want to be kicked out.
Yeah, I think that's what it comes down to for so many of these findings. It's a fundamental fear of being shut out of the tribe, because we need the group for survival, and that's an evolutionary need. And so anything we do that makes us seem, just undesirable in some way, like people don't like me, it's incredibly painful, to the point where we'll do all sorts of other personally upsetting things just for the sake of, the respect and the being included in the group.
Yeah. So I see we're very short on time. So I wanted to ask a question real quick, and it kind of relates to the dark side and the people in power, and we don't really have time to unpack all that. But I was thinking, what came to my mind as I was reading that section more than anything, I was like, where does this tipping culture fit into all this? Because this is like a big thing right now. People are really starting to get kind of agitated with the flip the screen around, answer a few questions. And there's a little bit of a power dynamic there.
Yeah.
Right? Because they're preparing your whatever, coffee, whatever. So there's and there's the politeness and the, I don't want to upset. There's people around. Like there's so much dynamic going into that interaction. And I think that's why it's so agitated for people. But as someone who studied this, like, have you done any studies around that, or what's your opinion on like what's going on there?
Yeah, that's a super interesting question. And I can stick around for a few minutes. I'm fine. But so I have been asked about this a few times. And at first people would say to me, like, this whole like screen tipping culture, I feel like it's going to get less tips because people are just going to, like, it's so easy to be like, no, 000, right? But I think what we've seen is it actually is like a lot of pressure, right? And it actually fits very much with kind of the main point of the book, which is that, we think that you have to kind of go all out to convince someone to do something. Like you have to come up with this very strategic way to ask them to tip you, or like come up with these like clever ways of making a request. But the most subtle, simple thing. I turn it around and it gives you the option. And now you feel like a jerk if you don't click one of the like tip buttons, right? It's so subtle, it's so simple, and all it does is draw on this fundamental desire to be liked and be polite and, you know, not do something that's going to make you look bad or offend somebody. And yeah, I think it's incredibly I think it's actually, there is a lot of pressure from that.
Do you think it's taking advantage of the consumer in that moment?
I'm not sure. I think there's
From the
definitely,
power dynamic dark side, I'm thinking of that chapter. I know you
yeah.
were thinking bigger issues, but I was kind of like everyday life. Where does this show up to? And
No, I love that idea. I mean, I guess it depends on whether you feel like people should be tipped more or not, right? If you're like, this
yeah,
is actually like a big part of their wages and they should be tipped more. But you know, there definitely are ways you could still do that and give people an out so it didn't feel like so much pressure. So I mean, one way is that at our supermarket here at Wegmans, like there's a self checkout, and at the very end it says like, do you want to donate to, you know, this organization? And, you know, it used to be like a person who would ask you and you had to say no. And that was really hard.
right,
And here you're just like, there's no one looking at you or anything, but there's that pressure. But they have a button that says not today. And I feel like that gives you this excuse, like, I'm a good person. Like maybe I'll do it another day. Right.
yeah,
And maybe today is the day, but I can click not today. And it's not the same as no. Right. It's not the same as
yeah,
zero. It's like another time because I am good. And, you know, it's all good, but just not today.
yeah.
So I think you could do that with tipping, like not today, and people would feel better than just no or zero.
And I could see how over time, especially in a place like Wegmans where you're coming back on a regular basis, you probably would eventually be like, yeah, I'll do that. It's kind of been planted that someday I'm going to do that. And eventually you're like, I feel good today. Let me give $1 or whatever. I could see
Yeah.
how that might happen.
That's a Seinfeld. If Seinfeld were still on today, that's a whole Seinfeld episode.
Yeah. You're starting to see a lot of memes around that. I actually saw one where the guy was at the self checkout and it asked for a tip at the self checkout.
A tip? Oh, yeah, that's to me very different than like a charitable donation. That's
Yeah.
funny.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a joke, but it was still kind of funny. But now I've seen other people like, if I'm standing up to give my order, you're not getting a tip. Like if I'm seated, that's one thing. But if I'm standing, you're not getting a tip. Like, so that's kind of probably the camp I
Good
fall
rule
in.
of thumb. That's a
Yeah.
good rule of thumb.
Mhm.
I think so
And part
too.
of it is they're drawing on the mindlessness. Like you get used to just like click, click, click. And I
Yep.
always click like 20% or whatever. And even in moments where if I actually thought about it, I'd be like, this is not a tipping situation. I've clicked it and you can't go back. Like,
Yeah,
how
excuse
do
me,
I undo the tip? Yeah.
could you turn that back around, please? I'd like to change my answer. That would be awkward.
Yeah. So I want to mention real quick. There's one section in your book that I loved. It's referred to. I don't think you termed it, but the fuzzy trace theory. And this resonates with me because I know that if I do a presentation or I'm in a presentation setting for a meeting and there's several people, I'm always doing what I guess we would term, Sean and I go back, we're pre-military, so we call it an AAR after action review in your mind, where you're thinking about every little thing that you said and you're analyzing that to death. Where in reality, your brain, the people on the other side who are listening to your presentation, aren't listening to every word that you're saying. They're not hanging on everything that you're saying. They're getting the gist, but a lot of the cognitive, a lot of what's happening in their brain is paying attention to some of the nonverbal cues. It seems like your enthusiasm, your passion for what you're talking about. Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah. So fuzzy trace theory is this idea that we basically, when we interact with someone or even read something or just encounter some sort of message, we walk away with two representations, the exact verbatim thing that was said, and then a fuzzy trace of the gist of it. And the verbatim representation disappears really fast. And all we're left with is kind of like a fuzzy trace, a gist. So like if someone makes a long impassioned argument about why like, this like cherry lime, whatever cider shouldn't exist. And it's like, cider needs to be pure.
Right.
You'd walk away just being like, I don't remember anything he said, but he really doesn't like flavored cider,
Right.
So you walk away with this like fuzzy trace. And most of sort of the cues that we do take away are like, are they positive or negative on this thing, like an evaluation? And when it's interpersonal, it's like, are they warm and friendly? Did they seem to like enjoy the interaction, or did they seem kind of cold? And we walk away being like, I didn't say these 5 things to persuade this person, or I said these 5 things wrong in this conversation and they probably hate me. And really they're just walking away with like a general like, oh, they had a pretty good argument for X, or that was a pleasant interaction. And no one is kind of picking apart the details the way that we think they are.
Even if it's completely illogical at times. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the arguments may not even make sense.
Yeah.
But if you're passion, if you have passion behind it, sometimes that's what they remember. And how you argued the point, not so much the points of it that made no sense, maybe at times.
Exactly.
Like kind of like what happens on our show on a regular basis.
Yeah, you could say something that is totally illogical, and it depends. Sometimes you could be like, well, that doesn't make sense, but you could still walk away, and 5 minutes later you're just thinking like, Jonathan argued X, and that's all I remember. Like, that's your opinion, and now it's just associated with you. And
Sure. Fascinating.
So I guess the big takeaway here is, be willing to ask more, but at the same time, don't abuse it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last thought that I had is, are people asking less because of tech and convenience as well? Like, it seems like we don't have to ask for as much stuff as we did 20, 30 years ago. Like, we don't have to ask for directions anymore. We don't have to ask for a ride to the airport. Uber can take us. We don't have to. There's so many places, and I know some of that is based on income and things like that, but there's so many places where we used to have to interact and ask. I wonder if we've also lost some of that skill over time, and which makes it kind of more fearful, more anxiety inducing.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, because I think on the one hand, almost it's easier to ask over email or text and through technology. And so I think in some ways we ask more for things just because we don't have to ask face to face. But I think the cases that you're talking about, like directions, rides, I have a student who wrote about Venmo and how it's made asking for money, like to be repaid for something, so much easier. These sort of apps that let you like skirt all those norms of asking and all the awkwardness of asking, because you just press a button and it asks for you. I think that's definitely like in those specific domains made a big difference. So the thing that it most I think relates to is I have some research showing that we don't get so anxious asking if we're going to pay someone for something, if it becomes like a market exchange. So when my participants hate asking for things, they get really like annoyed and they're like, I can't believe you're making me go ask strangers for things. But if we give them dollar bills and we say, go ask someone if they will fill this questionnaire out for this dollar, they feel so much better about it. And they think more people will agree. And it's just, now it's like a monetary exchange. And so like Uber, all those things, it's like, now I'm not asking a person for a favor. It's like I'm hiring someone, and we feel a lot better about that.
Yeah. But you actually found that it doesn't really make a difference though with the money, right?
Yeah, the people are just as willing to agree to small requests for free, but it makes us so much better to ask that way, to like turn it into like, I'm not asking you for a favor, I'm going to pay you.
Yeah. Pizza and beer when we help me move. Yep.
Yeah.
Reciprocation. It works.
Yeah, absolutely.
Vanessa, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Having you on. And again, the book is You Have More Influence. There it is on the screen. You have more influence than you think. Fantastic read. We could say so much more. I know you've got to run. Sean and I may discuss a little more while you're off the show, but we'll let you go and hope you have a wonderful Memorial Day weekend.
That sounds wonderful. You guys as well. Thank you so much. It's been really fun to chat.
Yeah,
thanks.
you bet. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Great book.
Yeah, some good stuff in there. One thing we didn't have a chance to cover was just kind of the last chapter on. She really talked about how you can kind of practice this.
Yeah.
You can go out and, first you could kind of just imagine, I think, what was it? See, feel, experience.
Mm-hmm.
So you can look back and take a little bit more of a objective view of a situation, almost like a fly on the wall. And you can see how, I could see how maybe I was overly anxious about this, and this person probably wasn't thinking what I thought they were thinking, and that kind of stuff. And then the other is to kind of try to tap into that emotional and be empathetic and feel. But the third part I really liked was just the experience. Like, go out and just like try some of this stuff.
Of course.
Just go ask questions. And she talked about how, what was the name of the card game? I'd not heard of that before. Had you? Had you got that far? Yeah, so it's basically some guy invented a card game where you just go out and ask. You have these challenges that you go ask for.
Yeah.
So you might like ask one example was you ask the Costco manager if you can say something over the loudspeaker. And the point is to, get used to rejection, but also the side effect is you realize people are much nicer. Even if they say no, they're much nicer than we think they're going to be about how they say no and why they say no and those kind of things.
What's that show on? It's like that comedy show they're like four friends and they do all these pranks on people.
I used to watch that all the time. I went through a phase where I watched it all the time.
Because we watched several episodes of that a few months ago, and I'm trying to, I can't think of it, but it's so funny because it's all spontaneous. They make them do it on the spot, and they have to or they lose points. But
then they got to do something at the end that's just really crazy that they don't want to do.
That they don't want to do. It's always so embarrassing. It's like, it's so entertaining because you feel awful for the person that's having to do it. But these guys are all good. I mean, I think these guys were all childhood buddies that are doing this.
Impractical jokers.
That's it. Impractical jokers. I love it. It's so funny.
Yeah.
That's a good lesson.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I think, like always, there's a dark side. And that is if you know this, you could really push the asking. You could really kind of make people feel bad. And you could take it the wrong way. Obviously you don't want to go that far with it. But I think it's very empowering to know that it's probably half as bad as I think it's going to be, right? Based on all her research over the last 15 years, that literally, I was amazed how consistent the research stayed, that you overestimate by twice how difficult it's going to be to get people to say yes.
Really? And it goes back to, she cites the Cialdini originally, about the fake because, what we call the fake because. And the fake because is anytime you insert because, it doesn't matter the reason. If you tell somebody you want to skip the line because I'm in a hurry, well, because you've given a reason, it doesn't even have to be a valid reason, but because you've given a reason and you've used the word because, you've justified your reasoning, most people will allow you to do that, which makes, in our minds is like, why would they do that? But people are willing to work with you if you give them a reason.
Yeah. And a lot of times based on her research, you don't even need a reason. You just ask.
That's right. Just ask.
A good third to half the people are going to say yes.
Yeah.
Which is pretty wild, but
so I'm curious in your coaching, is this, I'm sure you pulled some things out from a coaching standpoint that really applies to a lot of the people that you work with.
Yeah. I think the big thing is, because one of the big things I see in coaching is people have this unspoken expectation around a relationship or around like, it always deals with another person. Like, I'm expecting things to be a certain way. Yes. And that expectation causes me to hesitate or to whatever. Sometimes it's hesitate. Sometimes it's lack of empathy. it goes both ways. So realizing that you've got this expectation that things may actually be harder than they actually are, that you're out of touch with reality. Now, you wouldn't know that unless you read a book like this, but yeah, as a coach, I can say, hey, there's scientific studies that show it's not as bad as you think it's going to be. Like, it's really not. So
never is.
Go out and have that conversation, or go out and, make that request.
And I think there's certain personalities that are probably more prone to looking at the glass half empty as opposed to glass half full. And so I think those people are, for the people that tend towards the glass half empty, this is where it really, this is where the lesson really hits home. It's like, you really it goes back into psycho-cybernetics and all of those things that we've talked about in the past, where you really have to almost retrain your brain.
I was going to say it's a skill you can develop to, we know that from both of us being in sales.
Yep.
It's a skill rejection never feels good. I don't know that you can ever just completely get over it.
Nope.
But you can definitely get better at asking, even if the rejection still hurts.
Right.
So I think that's the skill. I don't think there's necessarily a skill where you just completely get numb to rejection.
No.
If you are, then you probably just don't care about what you're doing, which is a different problem.
No. Yeah. You got to have some hurt there, or some,
yeah.
You feel it a little bit. Everybody feels it a little bit, but
yeah. When, you thought the deal was going well, you had a good lunch, whatever. It's like, and then boom, no. So yeah, that's tough. But yeah, I actually sent this book to a couple people by text. I said, you ought to read this because I think it would apply to your business as well. And
sure,
if your people knew about this, they might be. I could see this like in real estate too. Like, be willing to have more conversations. People more willing to have conversations than you think they are.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I'm sure some network marketing company will get a hold of this book and like make it a must read.
Must read, of course. So, even you think about door to door, how hard that used to be. Never do you see door to door salespeople anymore.
We get the pest control guys in our neighborhood.
Yeah.
Like, those guys come around. Sometimes the painters, things like that, but very, very few. You don't see the vacuum guys coming around, like all that kind of stuff. At least not in our neighborhoods. But
I think even if you did today, I think that it's not as hard as you think still.
Yeah, it's still hard, but it's not as hard as you think.
Yeah, people are willing to talk to people. I think that if you know what you're doing, that there is because I always answer the door. Somebody comes up. Now they might not get a sale, but they're obviously going to get a conversation. They're not going to get somebody that just ignores them or shuts the door.
I think I actually wrote that on my notes. I wrote down, I often say yes to reward their willingness to ask.
Absolutely.
Because I've been in sales. I've done those things.
Yep.
That if I, not always, just every time, but I will default to yes, unless I just don't need it.
Of course. Yeah.
Just because somebody's willing to ask. Like, always buy the little lemonade from the kids with the lemonade stand, the Girl Scout cookies.
Right.
But I'll tell you this, I did this year. I would not buy the Girl Scout cookies unless they stopped me while I was walking in the store and actually said something.
Yeah.
Because there's some I went by and they would not.
They wouldn't do anything. They're just standing there. Right.
They wouldn't get out of their bubble and, even try.
Absolutely.
So that wasn't getting rewarded. But had they asked, they would have got a sale.
And here's a lesson, Sean, because I was at a trade show this week, and we always harp on those trade shows, man. These people need lessons in this because they're always, almost every booth that I went by, as I'm walking down these aisles at this expo, people are hurt. They're huddled in their little groups behind the booth.
It's like
talking
walking
to
death
themselves.
Row. It's like walking death row. Everybody's like, oh my God, this is the end. This is it.
And it's like, how much did your company spend on this setup? And you're talking to yourselves and not interacting with people as they walk by.
I bet most people in those booths don't even know how much is spent on those shows. If they
no,
did, I think they'd be trying a little harder.
Right.
They,
Yeah.
whoever's in charge of that should probably tell people,
of course,
how much was spent on this. Like
you do know. Oh, by the way, do you know how much
this is not just a field trip to get you out of the office.
Right.
This is like, we need leads.
Yeah. Guys sitting in chairs, literally sitting in the chair.
Yeah.
Just like they don't care.
Yeah.
And it's like, I had to literally engage with people at times just to get a conversation started. Yeah. Hey, what do you guys do?
That is,
because you're not helping me here.
Yeah. I mean, that you would have to walk down a trade show aisle and ask somebody what they do.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That is pathetic. I mean,
it's bad. It's really bad.
Yeah. And it is, because it's all this idea that, I mean, I think she was right that it probably all boils down to just this primal need to not offend, get kicked out of the tribe.
Right.
If you're afraid you're going to upset somebody, but the research shows you're probably not going to upset the person.
No, never.
Even if they say no,
yeah,
you're not upsetting them.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Like, you're moving on, so yeah. Well, it's good stuff.
Yeah. Excellent topic. Again, the book is, You Have More Influence Than You Think. We'll post a link on our show page this week. Check it out. We highly recommend it. I downloaded the Kindle, and then I went and ordered the physical book because I took my Kindle I was reading the Kindle on the plane this week, and just doing the highlighting thing all through that thing. It's fantastic read.
Yeah, and it is packed. I have never seen so many universities, doctors, and citations in like one book.
Yeah,
of this size. Like, it is like, I mean, this whole back section is just citations.
Oh yeah,
like it's just
a lot of research.
Yeah, you would think she was like a researcher or something.
Good stuff.
We got a good one next week, I think.
Yeah, I'm so excited. We got the next couple of weeks. We've got guests lined up. You've got a guest lined up for us next week who has put a funny theme to funnels. So I'm looking forward to talking with him.
That'll be a little bit more lighthearted conversation than what we had today. So that'll be that'll be fun.
Yeah. So next week, looking forward to that. And then the following week, we're going to we'll follow that. We'll transition from funny into dark persuasion on the following episode. So we like to keep it, we like to hit both ends.
Yep. Keep it fair and balanced, right?
That's right. But to all of our listeners, we hope you all have a great Memorial Day weekend. Sean, you got plans coming up?
Not a single one. It is too hot here to do anything.
Same here, except for maybe taking a dip in the pool, right?
Yeah.
It's hot and muggy. And have you guys gotten any? I'm sure it's dry right now, right? Not much rain.
We haven't had much rain in the last week, but it's way more humid than it usually is. So that's even worse.
Yeah,
I'd rather have the rain.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, if I'm going to be wet when I go outside, I would like it to be rain, not sweat.
Yeah, I agree. So. Well, have a great weekend. To all of our listeners, you check us out, persuasionbythepint.com. You can check us out if you listen to us on Spotify, iHeart, Stitcher, any of those platforms. We're there. Check us out. Do a quick search. Leave us 5-star reviews, like we would like to leave our beer ratings at times, but very few get them. And we'll see you all next week.
See ya.